Hello. It's time to meet and greet. It's a good turnout. Good afternoon and welcome to the Berkman Center for Internet and Society and Harvard Library Meet and Greet. My name is Mark McGee. I work for the Harvard Library, and I'm a member of the Harvard Library Strategic Conversations Planning Committee. For those unfamiliar with the Harvard Library Strategic Conversations group, we are made up of volunteer members from the library community. Our mission is to engage our colleagues in open, community-driven discussion about the future of libraries. And to that extent, we've had several events over the past year bringing together communities that care about libraries to discuss different lively topics. One of our big events was the Oxford-style debate, which you might remember. I'd like to thank the Berkman Center for enthusiastically agreeing to co-sponsor this meet and greet with us. And special thanks to Carrie Anderson, Amar Asher, and Sebastian Diaz from the Berkman Center for helping us to conceive and plan today's event. I'd also like to thank my Harvard Library Strategic Conversations co-planners for their contributions, Karina Baksic, Kimberly Hall, Sue Kriegsman, and Donna Visculia. The Berkman Center and the Harvard Library have already been collaborating on many projects, some of which we'll hear about today. However, both the Harvard Library and the Berkman Center are engaged in a wide array of activities, too vast to cover in any single event. Looking through the RSVP list today, we have members from the Harvard faculty, researchers, Berkman Fellows, something called Berk Turns, and library staff members from over 24 libraries, library units, offices, and departments. The purpose of today's meet and greet is to provide another opportunity for our groups to become better acquainted with each other and to build on existing relationships between our communities. We hope that by highlighting a handful of projects from each community, some of them overlapping, we can extend our existing connections, learn from each other, and foster more ongoing conversations. Today's meet and greet will consist of 6 speakers who will be presenting projects with which they've been involved. From the Berkman Center, we have Sebastian Diaz, Rob Ferris, Allison Head, Jeff Hermes, and from the Harvard Library, we have Chris Erdman and Matt Phillips. Thank you to all for sharing your work with us today. Following our speakers, we'll have time for an open discussion. We can ask questions of the speakers at that point and bring up any new topics that we'd like to share or ask of each other. This event is being recorded, so when we get to the discussion, if you'd just please use the microphone, we'll pass those around. And on behalf of the Harvard Library Strategic Conversations Planning Group, thank you for coming and participating today. And I'm going to turn this over to Sebastian Diaz from the Berkman Center.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon. My name is Sebastian Diaz. I'm the Chief Technologist at the Berkman Center. Actually, it's over that way. And on behalf of the Berkman Center, I'd like to welcome you to today's talk and thank you for coming. I want to extend a special thank you to Mark and his co-planners, Kimberly and Donna, Sue, and Karina, and for proposing this idea for this meet and greet with Berkman. It's great to see a community interested and engaged to learn about each other and taking time from their schedules to meet each other. I certainly hope today's talk will be useful in giving you an idea about how the Berkman Center is involved with library projects and the library lab, and as well give you a quick intro on a couple of associated projects. I also hope that today's event will give you an idea of where to connect and put a face to a name and an organization in your community. There is a web of connections here, obviously, that can be taken advantage of, and ones that you may already be part of. So I'm going to be talking about the library lab, the library, Berkman, and Harvard, and how all these are currently involved in an innovation cycle framed by the library lab. And when I say innovation cycle, I'm going to talk to you specifically about how these players understand, identify, test, produce, and adopt ideas to move forward the process of innovation. But first, a small digression already. Have you ever thought of what the internet thinks innovation is. If you do a quick image search on Google, like this is always fun, you can do it with any term, you come up with 2.2 billion results in a quarter of a second. And a lot of these depict innovation as a moment, or like a light bulb lighting up as you go further. A lot of them, actually a significant chunk. But as you go down further, you see some people think of innovation as a place. There is no US city named Innovation, unfortunately. I think a lot of people would probably move there. And you proceed through the results, you see more like cycles and collaborative images that sort of illustrate, I guess, what I think of innovation. With that in mind, back to understanding, identifying, testing, producing, and adopting. So librarians listen, collect, and research to understand. One of their core missions being to support the progress of knowledge and creativity for the benefit of their patrons. The library is great at this. The library, I guess I should put that in caps. And we have a vast data resource at our disposal, along with carefully curated collections to understand a research question. However, the question may be a little bit different within Library Lab. It may be to understand how communities and patrons are interested, not just what they're interested in. So once you understand, you can identify the idea and move it forward. The Library Lab excels in this process. Its driving mission is to encourage individuals to identify innovative and cooperative ways to make libraries work better. This is actually from Library Lab's homepage. Testing the idea in a practical way gives you an idea of interest. The Library Lab's process is advantageous here, as well as with a committee and an engaged community discussing and commenting on the proposed ideas. The experimentation begins here, and the experimentation is exciting. There's always unknown results, or there's always an unknown with results. Now here, I digress again for a second, because I think the unknown results idea can be really an off-putting thing. But in the Library Lab setting, it shouldn't be. Libraries are a bit in flux, and I think not only Harvard's library, because the role they play with the stewardship and research of data. The internet and other disruptive technologies are totally changing this. But this is advantageous in so many ways because libraries are sitting in the crossroads and have so much to offer and so many tools to play with and data to experiment on. So back to the cycle. After test, produce. Berkman's mission is to listen to the technological and societal currents, build out into that space, again, from the homepage, and share that knowledge back into the community. The Berkman Center has been incubating innovative projects and building out odds and ends for a long time. The role that the Berkman plays with the Library Lab is to build on our core set of knowledge and expertise and improvise to the needs of the new projects coming through Library Lab. We have in-house expertise with project management and technical development and contribute these skills to the projects we engage in. The last part of the cycle is adoption. But if you recall my last digression, this may also be abandonment, depending on the results. And both are good. You learn something with both. Harvard's infrastructure plays a huge role in adoption, as they can adopt innovative ideas and integrate them so that a broader set of community can use them and repeat the full cycle. Thank you.
Yes. Can you hear me? Here I am, many miles away. Am I on? Yes. Oh. Here I sit. It's not lunchtime yet, but you're making me really hungry. I'm on the West Coast, actually. Okay. I'm going to just show you some quick slides here, and what I want to talk to you about is a project that I direct called Project Information Literacy. Is everything okay? You can hear me and see me and see that I'm fumbling here. Okay. You're good. That's like a one-time line, I think, or maybe. I mean, you can only use it in a crowd like this. You really can't probably use it. Probably wouldn't play well in other situations. What I want to give you is just an overview of a project I direct called Project Information Literacy. This is a national ongoing research study that when I think of it and describe it, it really is grassroots. We have a volunteer sample of U.S. institutions that include public and private colleges and universities. Harvard's in the sample, as well as community colleges, often a constituent that's left behind in studies. I've got an echo here, so I'm kind of listening to different things. What are we investigating here? We're trying to understand the practices of today's college students. That is, how they conduct research. Thank you for fixing that, by the way. How they conduct research for courses as well as in their everyday lives. I think what's interesting and different about this study is that we're looking at it and studying it as social scientists, as information scientists, through the lens of the student experience. In other words, in their words, through their accounts, and through their experiences. For those of you that work in libraries, there are a number of different standardized tests that have tried to measure some of these concepts and have been successful. But we saw a gap here where we really wanted to find out the student's story, and that has led us on the path here, which Harvard has actually, I'm really honored to say, been very involved in these studies, especially people like Laura Farwell Blake, Sue Gilroy, who's actually on our board, Susan Fliss, and others. So Harvard's involvement actually has been in 4 out of 6 of our studies. It began, Harvard was first in our sample actually, in a series of focus groups we did with Harvard college students back in 2008. We went on to include Harvard college students in a survey that was about how students found and used information, as well as a content analysis. I spoke at one of the last strategic conversations in April or May, I think, about our content analysis of professors' handouts. We also went on to do a large-scale survey of how students evaluated information, as well as what their difficulties were with the research process. And then in 2011, a piece that we always felt was there, but we really needed to address more thoroughly, was the use of the library during crunch time, and especially the use of technology and the issue of multitasking during a time of tremendous pressure. So now, today, what's going on? We have funding, God willing, from IMLS. We have funding as well as support from the Berkman to do something that we're now calling the passage studies. I'm working currently, in fact, I'm writing the report this month about graduates in the workplace. This, if you follow the literature, this has been an unknown. There's so little known to what happens the day after graduation in terms of graduates' information-seeking behavior, as well as how they apply it in the workplace and in life at large. This is really exciting. The report comes out October 15th. I hope to present some of these findings at Harvard as well. The other half, these are really bookend studies, the passage studies, which is our new research initiative. The other half of this will be what we're calling the freshman studies. And this will be the first year freshman experience. So we've got the beginning and the end, critical information transitions that early adults go through, how they adapt, how they adopt practices, and what their information seeking behavior comes to be, especially in the digital age. I'm really excited about the 2012 findings, really interesting things about, I won't give it all away, but we interviewed employers as well as graduate students. We did a focus group at Harvard on May 19th, actually, at the Berkman. Thank you, Berkman. And what we found is a tremendous gap between the preparedness of students when they graduate from college, and then on the other side, what employers expect, as well as, and here's the important piece, what they assume about today's graduates. Of course, computer savviness is a big piece of this, but what employers have also found is today's graduates do not demonstrate some of the most fundamental skills in the workplace, such as picking up the phone, calling somebody, going into somebody's office, looking at old dog-eared print copies of an annual report from 5 years ago. Really good stuff in this study about the gap, identifying the gap, and beginning to look at this issue qualitatively, which will follow up in about a year and a half quantitatively. So that's where we are. That's what we're up to. Why? Why do I spend my time doing this? And what's really the trajectory of this research? I come at this as, I do have a degree in library and information science, a PhD, but I also was a new media professor. Both of these careers really led me to question, how do students find and use information today, especially the impact of the internet, the impact of the web? How have their information-seeking behaviors been impacted or affected by digital media, largely? Ideally, what we're trying to do, and I think this is where it resonates with librarians as well as faculty and administrators, is we're trying to identify throughout the thread of our work, which is up on the Project Information Literacy site. We issue a report every year. It's a PDF. It's open access. Thank you, Peter Suber. But we're trying to identify what gaps exist between today's students and how they learn, how they're taught, and how they experience the information landscape, as well as how those gaps can be narrowed. Librarians, I'm very thankful, have really been a huge supporter and very actively supported our research effort, more than I ever imagined, by the way. So it's we're continuing to progress, and it's really been a fulfilling project. So overall, quick snapshot. If you're unfamiliar with PIL, what we found, and I'll sum this up very quickly, is that we found this in the first study, the qualitative findings, coming out of Harvard and 5 other institutions, actually, including community colleges and public colleges and universities. Students kept telling us that research was more difficult for them than it had ever been before in their lives. And that was the thread that really led and drove our research process. And what we found in a later study, when we asked this question, we actually asked it at Harvard, so we do have that data. It's not publicly known. It didn't appear in that report. We asked it again with a much larger sample, and that question was, what's most difficult about conducting course-related research? This is interesting. What we found, especially for librarians, I think, or instructors, comp instructors, XPOS instructors and faculty that work with students on the research process, what we found was a couple of really takeaway findings. One is that students, despite the plethora of information resources on their campus, services as well as sources themselves, students tended to dial down all that was available to them. In other words, what we've written is most travel the information landscape with a very small landscape. I mean, with a very small compass. They only use a few sources. For them, the most difficult part of the research is something that a lot of librarians actually have told us that they don't spend time on, which is the beginning of the process, not search, but really the beginning of the process, narrowing down a topic, choosing a topic, defining a topic, and getting started. At Harvard here, in the red, narrowing down a topic was 35% of the sample said they had difficulty at Harvard with narrowing down a topic. The other concern they had was the difficulty they faced was writing papers. How does that compare to the rest of the sample? It's pretty interesting. The rest of the sample, from our larger study in 2010, we found that 62% of the sample had trouble narrowing down a topic. So this isn't as much of a problem at Harvard. Students don't have, as many students didn't report having issues, but this was one of the top problems that they did have at Harvard. An interesting thing as well is that what we found from the research is that Harvard students, Harvard College students, are huge users of resources. And the databases refers to scholarly research databases, ProQuest, Cengage, both of these actually, in full disclosure, have funded our research in the past as well as MacArthur. But they are huge users of databases as well as journals and books. The rest of the sample, the rest of the institutions in the other study, which were 25 institutions, only 80%. So again, we see this discrepancy. Something at Harvard that comes up over and over again in conversations, and this is kind of one of my final points here, is that Harvard students are unique. You hear this over and over again. The question is, how are they unique? And especially if you're providing information services, if you're trying to instruct students to be better learners, ask better inquiries, and be more analytical, how are they unique? How can we understand this? We don't have the answers to everything, and here's the last thing that I end with, which is really interesting, and that is at Harvard, 91% of the sample were Wikipedia users when they had a course-related research assignment. The rest of the sample, 62. So there's a discrepancy here, too. Why do students at Harvard tend to use Wikipedia? And again, this is from 2009. Maybe this has changed since then. We may pull this thread when we look at the freshman study because it's just so interesting. So again, there are things we can answer, but we seem to keep being successful at unfolding and unpacking what it's like to be a student in the digital age today. Thanks for your time. Thank you, Dan and Ed, for letting me appear for the first time without jet lag and from the West Coast. Take care. It's really an honor to be asked. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Allison. That was Allison Head, Berkman Center. Next up is Chris Erdman. He's going to talk about the Harvard Library UX. He's from the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics and the John Walbach Library.
It's working. I don't have to do the introduction now. I'm here to talk to you about Harvard Library UX. Is it? Oh, okay, I can do this. And I always like to show our use case. One other group here has emphasized having an artist on campus to help with projects. And we had someone help with a use case. I thought it was great, like one of the side projects that we had. And also here are all the people that Lynn and Paul are here. So thanks to you also. This is going well. One of the things that I'd like to start with is just our overall philosophy in the group is that we believe that our connection to the users is probably one of our most vital assets in the library. And one of the other things, and probably some of this sounds familiar to the Harvard Library Lab as well, but it's we serve as an excellent test bed for research that's happening around the university. But I think one way that we differ too is that these libraries should come, the ideas we'd like to take what are in labs, just hidden away within campus, and work with the faculty, because they tend to not have this connection to users. It's something that I've noticed, and it's an asset that we can bring in the library. The other thing is that I took this image of the Flugtag, if you know what it is. People do crazy things. They have all sorts of ideas, and they try to fly them off of a cliff. It's sponsored by Red Bull, and this is a flying Flapjack. But I like the idea that that nothing's perfect. They just have fun, and they throw it out. They do something for the world to see, and there's just no fear. And I think that one of our difficulties in the library is that we're perfectionists, and we want things to be 100% certain before we put them in the libraries. And the other thing is, I like to think of us as Switzerland. Faculty tend to trust us better. Like instead of going to other faculty, I feel like they feel more comfortable with us. And I've experienced this on other occasions, in different projects. And the other thing, another philosophy which melds very well with a report that we had, was that we wanted to put an idea out there that merged the physical and the digital. And so we latched on to this giant iPad. It's called the Microsoft Surface Table. We have the Sur 40, as it's called. And we also, something that was sponsored by the Harvard Library Lab, is we did some development on a piece of software. We worked with Brown, and they were doing things in a lab away from the users. So we said, let's take this software. Let's, it has some great concepts in it, annotation, and I don't know why I'm looking at you, Sue, all the time, but annotation, snapshotting, and some other things that we wanted to get out there for the users. And so we had this crazy idea. Let's have a usability test. Doesn't happen too often in libraries, but to get IRB approval and permission letters, and so we created a scenario, a structured usability test. We staged it in Cabot out in the open, which also is kind of rare, I think. And we had 30 undergraduate students. We recruited them with Starbucks cards. They like Starbucks cards instead of iTunes cards. And then we had 3 graduate students from Simmons conduct the test. And we had various equipment capturing it, webcams, Moray software, and we stitched everything together later on and captured the data into Adobe Premiere Video. But in the end, this all occurred in April of this year. And in the end, we will be submitting a paper to ACM, ITS. It's a conference that will be here in November. And I think it'll be a huge achievement to get a library paper in ACM, which I'm crossing my fingers. But one of the things that really was one of the most surprising things about this project is that we had a display case of items that we had in the library, and then we had the Surface Table right next to it. We had the same items in that display case on the table. And when people were interacting with the table, they often had the same response. 2/3 of them, actually over 2/3 of them, said, "I never knew the library had resources like this." And it was right behind them in the display case. So, this is I think one of the more shocking things that came out of this. The other thing is that Hollis, they wanted integration with Hollis. They wanted to use this with some of the systems that we had on campus. And one of the things that our project has highlighted is that it's hard to get this material out of these systems. It took us 2 weeks to get some of these items out, like some of the digital images. And the other thing is we found that they're not of the format that we really need for which the technology is called Deep Zoom. But we had we found this out. We found that they wanted to visualize these collections in new ways. One of the ideas that we thought of was Bohemian Bookshelf, but another one is shelf life, being done here that could have potential on this table, or other devices. And then we came away with some functionality things like the task of throwing an item away wasn't so intuitive, and you had to throw it off the table. And they said that they didn't quite understand that. They didn't quite understand it at first, but then people got the hang of it. They wanted other various things, but it was very revealing that that paper will be out sooner or later. And then our next up is that we would like to conduct another test in October, and again with 30 students, this time unstructured. And we'd like, I have these gloves here, but a touch glove that can actually can detect all the touch points on a table, so even more specificity in our test. And then the other thing is, we've talked a lot about champions in projects, and I think one of the people that really held this project together is Susan Bursler. I think she's Wonder Woman, by the picture, but it doesn't have to be someone on top, like someone, a director or something like that. I think really we've done well because of her passion, and she's gotten us on track and made connections across the university. So I think that, that was something that to note as well in our project. I can show you a video, but I think I'd like to leave time for some other people as well. But you can go to Harvard Library UX to learn more about the project.
Thanks, Chris. Next up, we have Jeff Hermes from the Berkman Center, and he's going to be talking about the Digital Media Law Project.
Momentarily. There we go. Hi. As we mentioned, my name is Jeff Hermes. I work at the Digital Media Law Project. You'll see up here it says Citizen Media Law Project. I will explain that in a moment. We are a project based at the Berkman Center at Harvard, which is dedicated to filling a very specific information gap in online publication and online journalism. And that is, with the contraction of traditional journalism, we have seen an explosion of experiments in online sharing of news of public interest. However, the people who are engaged in that activity lack the legal resources and information long enjoyed by traditional media outlets. As a result, you have various organizations, small organizations, whether they're created, whether it's citizen journalism, people just off the street deciding they want to share information about their communities, or projects started by journalists who willingly or unwillingly found themselves dissociated from traditional media ventures, going out and trying to do these things on their own. However, for a lot of them, the best legal information they have if they're a journalist might have been a media law course they took in journalism school. Many ordinary citizen journalists don't have that information at all. So that's what we try to do. We try to provide them access to the kinds of resources they need to go about this activity, the sharing of information, without running into critical legal barriers. Now, we have been running since 2007. A couple of people I'd just like to highlight in the audience. Over on the left-hand side, we have Andy Sellers, who's my staff attorney. Could not do this without him. We also have guests from the Harvard Cyber Law Clinic with us, Chris Bavitz, Dahlia Tolpason, and Kit Walsh, with whom we work very closely. Now, we go about this project through 5 specific initiatives, which are actually, you can barely see them, but they're up at the top here. I want to walk through those for you. First one I want to talk about is our legal guide. Actually, I promised to explain the citizen thing, so I'll do that now. We started off as the Citizen Media Law Project. We're in the middle of a name change. We're going to be the Digital Media Law Project. It's a significant name change because we started off with the conception that we would be working with citizen journalists, people with no journalism training whatsoever. It rapidly became clear that many professional journalists and others with some experience are in this space. And so as a result, we want to make sure that we reflect in our name that we are dealing with all of these independent media publication, online media ventures. So, the legal guide. 600 pages of content on a variety of legal topics ranging from defamation and publication liability to intellectual property law to business formation, aimed at the educated lay reader. organized geographically in most instances. Our primary coverage is the 15 most populous states in the United States plus the District of Columbia. We did that because that way we could, with a relatively efficiently, provide information of use to roughly 85% of the United States population while only covering 15 states. That said, we are continuing to expand this. Right now we're working on adding pages for Arizona, Missouri, and Tennessee, the next 3 states in line, and we will continue to expand as these issues come up. The legal guide is fully searchable, and again, it's directed towards the educated lay reader. We try to explain these principles in a way which is accessible to the public. Okay. Our next initiative is the threats database. This is our database of legal action, cease and desist letters, police activity directed against online publishers. This is a research tool intended to be used both by academics as well as practitioners and people who are actually going about this work to identify clusters of activity and clusters of types of threats which are going on in our court systems and through official process right now. These threat entries are, I'll pull up an example of one. This is one which was just launched live today, which our interns have been working on. Each entry contains a detailed summary of information about the topic, detailed information about the parties involved, the attorneys involved. They are linked to outside links about the threat in question, also links to relevant documents from the case in question. The threats database has about 900 entries. It's growing all the time. It has turned out to be a very important research for certain researchers because it winds up being one of the only places online where you can find detailed information and access to court documents regarding state actions against online speakers. In the federal context, as most of you I'm sure know, case documents can be obtained through PACER. It's much harder to find information and documents about state cases. And so that's one of the gaps we're trying to fill. We do cover federal cases as well because we are looking at that broader issue of trying to identify clusters of specific kinds of threats. But we find that it's most useful because of the state coverage. Okay. Now, I talked a little bit about the legal guide. That's general information that's available to the public. We talked about the threats database tracking specific kinds of threats against speech. And that did not take. Okay. Our third initiative is our legal assistance initiative. When general information isn't enough, sometimes online publishers and online journalists need access to legal counsel. It can be very difficult to track down lawyers willing to assist these small organizations. To that end, we operate the Online Media Legal Network. It's a referral service. It's a free referral service. We currently have almost 270, Andy? 268 attorneys. Okay, 268 independent attorneys, law firms, and legal clinics around the country, 49 states plus the District of Columbia. Don't talk to me about South Carolina yet. We're working on it. Who are willing to provide pro bono and reduced fee legal assistance to these startup ventures, these independent online news ventures. To date, the Online Media Legal Network has been operating for about 2 years now. We have helped over 200 individual clients with over 400 separate legal matters to find assistance. Our fourth initiative is research and response. This is essentially our catch-all. We are in a position, because of the information that's coming to us through our partner organizations, through the attorneys and the Online Media Legal Network, through the clients who come to us for assistance, to be aware of growing trends in media law, growing threats and things which need particular attention. And so outside of our other initiatives, we try to respond to those. We try to provide tools to respond to urgent legal issues. So, for example, we create guides, white papers, and primers. The first one up here is one which we launched in April, which is our Guide to the Internal Revenue Services. Process for determining whether a journalism nonprofit qualifies for a tax exemption under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. Okay, tax law. But it winds up being very important because when you see this contraction in the news industry, you see journalism ventures trying to find new business models through which they can accomplish the act of journalism. You know, journalism has for a long time been a for-profit business. The IRS has for a long time treated journalism as a for-profit business. The IRS has a little bit of a problem when it sees a traditionally for-profit business coming in saying, no, actually, we're serving public ends, we're serving an educational purpose. We should be tax exempt under Section 501c3. There have been a series of delays recently in terms of nonprofit journalism programs applying for 501c3 status. Some organizations have been waiting in the IRS's process for over 2 years for a determination. We started hearing about this through the network. We looked into it. We determined that there is a tremendous lack of understanding as to what information the IRS is looking for in these applications. You know, the IRS is asking the organization questions about what it does. The organization doesn't understand why the IRS is asking, provides information. The IRS gets that information. It's not useful because it's not what they were looking for. It goes into these back and forths, which can sometimes go on for months on end. What did we do? We created a guide to try to explain to these ventures that are looking for their tax exemptions what the IRS is looking for, basic information, so that they can go through this process and hopefully accelerate the process and understand the traps and tricks which arise in the course of the IRS's analysis. We also get involved in amicus briefs. When we see court cases on important legal issues, we will jump in and try to provide courts with the benefit of our knowledge or experience. We speak to the press relatively regularly. We go to conferences and speaking events and just try to share what we've learned. Last initiative I'll just talk about very briefly is our publishing. We run a twice-weekly blog on media law topics, technology topics, and journalism topics. Contributors include all of the participants in the Digital Media Law Project here at Berkman, as well as a group of outside contributors. And you know, basically, this is what we see happening and just our commentary and our information to try to share that with the public. So the only other thing I'd like to do is acknowledge our interns who are helping us during the summer, Natalie and Tabitha, and is Kristen here? No, okay, well, Natalie Nickel, Tabitha Messick, and Kristen Bergman have been of tremendous assistance over the summer with all of these initiatives. And you know, it's all online. It's all about online resources. So please feel free to check it out. The current website is citmedialaw.org, but you can also get to it through our new URL, DMLP, for digitalmedialawproject.org. That currently will send you to this site, but soon, it will send you to our brand spanking new website with our new name. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Next up is Matt Phillips. Matt is from the Harvard Library Innovation Laboratory at the Harvard Law School.
Hi, I'm Matt. Thanks for having me. I really love the Harvard Library and the Berkman Center. I go to a lot of Berkman events, so it's really awesome to see things come together.
Oh, you are on, right?
Yep, I'm on here.
That's all right.
No problem. So right, I'm one of 6 people in this thing we call the Harvard Library Innovation Lab. We sit at Langdell Hall here in the law school. We've been around a couple of years. We do a bunch of different projects. Like I said, we're 6 people and we have a bunch of different things going on. I'm going to highlight one thing that we've been working on quite a bit lately. It came out just maybe a week and a half ago. So this is kind of a sample project, something that is hot off the grill. So it's this project called Shelf Me, and it lets you build these bookshelves, right? Helps you build them easily, and it helps you share them. So let's just walk through this quickly. So I'm logged in here. This is my account. These are my shelves, Miscellaneous, Seattle, and Berkman. So these are, recent Berkman books. Well, maybe not so recent, but they're Berkman books. Let's add some things to this shelf, right? So it happens through a bookmarklet. So I've got one up at Amazon here, interop, click the Shelf Me bookmarklet. It sends me to this Shelf Me add item page. So I want to add it to my Berkman page. It lets me do all kinds of customization. It's fairly smart. It parses the page coming from Amazon and knows that it's a book as opposed to a DVD or a CD or something like that. And it takes, it grabs information like book count and height. So, hopefully it kind of automates things for you. It doesn't make you do a lot of work up front. We grab things like ISBN too. You can color your book whatever color you want. So now we have it on the shelf there, right? And so it's not just books you can add web pages. Pretty cool to be able to put a web page on a bookshelf. So let's toss on the Berkman events page. You see it shows up as what we call a web page content type. And you can update these things as you're going. The Berkman Center events page, whatever you want. So we've got books, we got web pages. Let's do one more. Let's see. We got Lady Gaga. She's a friend of the Berkman, right? So we support Music Brains. We support IMDb. We support a bunch of things. It's smart enough to know that this is a DVD, or I'm sorry, a CD coming from Music Brains. Let's toss it on the Berkman shelf. You can do all this business if you want, but we probably don't want to do that. Toss it in. So now I've got this cool shelf of Berkman books. And what do I do with it? Well, hopefully you can copy this short URL and share it with your friends through email. You can tweet it, or we have this cool embeddable version that'll embed this little block in your blog or a web page or whatever. So that's kind of easy in through this bookmarklet, build yourself, easy out. So share with your friends. We support right now IMDb, Goodreads, Amazon, Music Brains, and Open Library. We'll add more support for other sites. Yeah, so it was released a week and a half ago. We're looking for feedback on kind of how to shape this. How can it be useful to people? Do people just create reading lists like this and share them? I don't know. It seems like one cool thing to me is if you want to keep track of maybe the books you've read, you're reading some on Kindle, you're reading some, physical books that you check out from the library. Well, you can build a full bookshelf of all things you've read that year. So let us know what you think. Give us some feedback. We can be contacted through the blog here. These are the people, or our site, and we also keep our blog active. So, follow us and give us feedback. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Next up, we have Rob Ferris from the Berkman Center. He's going to be talking about the OpenNet Initiative.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks to the organizers for pulling this together. It's wonderful to see such a great turnout. It shows us that we should never underestimate the convening power of the burrito, which was good. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the OpenNet Initiative, which I think is indicative of a lot of Berkman projects. It's a multidisciplinary kind of multi-methods project. It's very ambitious, trying to fill a niche, a hole in our knowledge about digital phenomena around the world, and it draws on networks, kind of concentric circles of researchers. It's a project that's very fond to me because it brought me to the center 6 years ago, and it's still going strong. The project started, I think, about 8 years ago with Jonathan, with dial-up connections to China and Saudi Arabia, very long lists of URLs, and a very, very expensive phone bill to try to find out what Saudi Arabia and China were filtering, as this was a new phenomenon back then. And we expanded this project with the help of the MacArthur Foundation to study internet filtering around the world. We wanted to identify and document filtering. And the way we went about it is our colleagues at the University of Toronto developed software that assisted with the data collection to understand internet filtering. And this software was then distributed through networks so that we had volunteers, individuals on different ISPs in different countries around the world. We've tested well over 100 ISPs around the world, and I think close to 70 countries now, to really understand who's filtering what around the world. This is combined with legal analysis and other background on the sociology and political climate in all these countries. So if you go to opennet.net, you'll find information, background context, and quantitative data on internet filtering around the world. We've also published 3 books, which will tell you more than you ever wanted to know about internet filtering around the world. And so a lot of information, just a few $1 million in 8 years, and we can tell you about internet filtering around the world. We, of course, in doing so, realized that understanding internet filtering by itself was an incomplete picture and that there's not a lot of other layers to that. So the research that's gone into the OpenNet Initiative has spawned many other threads of research at the Berkman Center. The closest one, again, Jonathan's idea, now being run by Ryan over here in the red shirt, is herdic.org, which is a crowdsourced version of the OpenNet Initiative. So individuals around the world can report internet outages, whether it be filtering or websites being down for a variety of reasons. And it's a lot more nimble. Maybe not all of the reports are completely accurate, but in aggregate, if you want a live view of internet filtering around the world, herdic.org. Herdic stands for verdict of the herd. Another project you should check out if you haven't already is chillingeffects.org. Chilling Effects acts as a clearinghouse for takedown requests. So when people are requesting Google and other companies to take down materials because of privacy concerns or copyright concerns, a notice gets sent to Chilling Effects, and Chilling Effects is creating a list and curating that. We've gone on to study DDoS attacks and other mechanisms that have brought content down around the world. We've also gone on to try and understand what it is that people are doing online. So not only the government regulation side of things, but really the civil society analogs of the counterparts of that, which is what is it that people are doing to try to change the world in social and political ways. So we've mapped blogospheres. We're now mapping Twitter. We'll start looking at Facebook pretty soon. We've developed a tool called Media Cloud, which is doing text analysis. David LaRochelle right there, has done a lot of work on that. And we most recently used that tool to start to map out the evolution of debates and controversies online. So if you haven't seen it, check out Yochai Benkler's presentations on the SOPA-PIPA debate, where we've taken the past 18 months of digital media and tracked where the ideas have taken root, where they've been shared, who the most prominent nodes in the networks have been, and how the memes and the arguments and the ideas have spread in digital media. So that's just a quick sampling of some of the projects that are going on in the Berkman Center. There's many, many more, and not enough time to do them justice, but thank you so much for listening.
We have about 20 minutes for questions and discussions. So maybe we want to start with questions for our speakers first. And just if you can use the microphone, I'll run around.
Just a quick question, I guess, for Matt. It looked really cool. It looked like something people should probably want to use. I was just wondering if you've done anything with any of the links to any library things. I mean, I noticed you had a bunch of internet websites that you experiment links with, but what about the library resources?
We haven't yet, but we do plan to support Hollis. Hollis is kind of actually a bit of a pain to drill down into 5 different iframes to get the thing you want, but it is planned. Also, I think an interesting feature that's on the enhancement list, it might be a ways out, I'm not sure, is if you add a book from Amazon or Open Library or whatever, maybe there's a little link that shows up on the book that says, well, I know it came in from another source, but find in my local library, find in WorldCat or wherever. So kind of library in, library out. Thanks.
From the presentations, it's so apparent how many of the sources of information we might turn to are lumpy, digitally speaking, and that's productive. It means that people can be creating their own databases on the fly. I mean, even here, there's a Chilling Effects database of threatening letters that people get, and then there's the Digital Media Law Project database of threatening letters that people get, which at some point, maybe you can threaten each other and then each have it in your respective databases.
We're trying to meet amicably.
Right, exactly. But that, I think, maybe leads to a question for everyone here, which has to do with one of the features associated with the library ethos is kind of forever. It's like we're here to make sure this stuff gets preserved, even through stretches of time where nobody thinks it matters, and then suddenly it matters again, or maybe even the fact that it's old is itself what makes it matter. So it didn't matter at the time, but it does now. And it just makes me think about ways in which, if any of our sub-projects were approached by a library who said, you know, we'd like to just fork off the database right now and put it into a vault, or we'd like to have something more ongoing, because so much of this is now server side. If the server goes down, if the server gets a takedown notice, including a server containing takedown notices. I mean, Chilling Effects often gets takedown requests for its database of takedown requests. To have escrowed it within a library, I think it moves the right switches in the right directions so that these projects don't rise or fall on the vicissitudes of individual researchers and their fortunes within the academy, of their own interests simply moving along to something else. And if there were just more routine ways to understand that part of the act of doing something in a scholarly way is to have an escrow partner that you fork off the data to with whatever restrictions you might find reasonable, that just seems to me something that we could really shift into high gear. And similarly, for your threat database in particular, Jeff, it seems to me almost a neat way, like in the library side of things, it's almost like special collections. I mean, when I think of special collection, it's like some really famous person gives all of her papers to the library, and maybe 30 years from now we'll have a chance to put them in the queue to digitize them properly. But it's almost as if everyone, kind of like the idea that everybody is famous for 15 people, this is an example then of everybody might have a little bit that belongs in a special collection. And if there are some ways to recognize that granularity and to be able to say possibly it's the library's role to assemble a special collection called Everybody's Takedown Letter. And so it's like the collected paper of me, and that paper is the takedown notice I got. And all I have to do is give you that. I don't know, it starts to think about, maybe that's too political a role for a library to serve, but if we don't, I don't know that we can continually rely on Brewster Kahle to just, you know, pick up the remainder. So anyway, those are some of the thoughts I was having as I heard this stuff.
I have a question on the last presentation about the filtering. Given what we've seen in Arab Spring and now in Syria, I'm thinking of some of my students from Georgia who were caught up with it, or with Russia when things were shut down there, but I was still hearing from them on Facebook and things like that. Can it be totally shut down and filtered, or are there ways always? Is it so ubiquitous now that there are ways around whatever impositions are being put on it?
Well, so we've seen in the last couple of years more often countries just shutting off the internet entirely, and that doesn't shut off all communication, obviously, but it certainly puts a damper on things a lot. As far as getting around filters, there are many ways to get around filters. There's a burgeoning industry in creating circumvention tools, and they have various degrees of success. Those can also be attacked by the government, and then they try to create new ways to get around the government filters. And a lot of it is in discovery, in trying to get out new means to get at these tools that will allow you to do that, and the government trying to circle around and shut them down. There's an unanswered question in this, which is how much the governments really want their power to be absolute, and to what extent adding these little relief valves is kind of intentional, or they let things there. I mean, one of the aspects of digital regulation is that it's either on or off. It's very black and white, and it's not like the gradients with loopholes as we have in a real world. And I think that in many cases, the governments, we see them turning up and down regulation of those very circumvention tools in effect occurring. So in a place like Iran or in China, they will ramp up the blocking of the circumvention tools during key sensitive political events. So it's an ongoing cat and mouse game, and we'll see the government, the U.S. government is of course throwing millions of dollars in developing these tools, which they find very nice and convenient to be used overseas, and are a little bit uneasy about them being used for other reasons. But anyway, thanks for the question.
Hi, my name is Michael Rand, and I'm visiting from New York, where I've been studying at Columbia University. And the question I have is directed to the library folks. I was just at 2 computer ed conferences, one called ISTE in California, and one led by a person here in Boston named Alan November. And one of the big things that seems to have hit is iPads and tablets. I mean, throughout, from K through 12 on through like Stanford Medical School, et cetera. And so I was curious if you were thinking of taking your research or using the research you did, let's say on the Surface type device, and applying it in that space.
I think one of the directions we want to go is that we'd like to partner with a company that actually makes these kind of, expands our software to other devices, so we just don't rely on one particular device. Because that's the other thing, is that we can't just rely on this one device. There's something new coming out all the time. And so one of the great things would be to actually have, we have 73 libraries here. So maybe not all the libraries, but like that each library tries out, maybe every one or 2 years this technology cycles through, and we, just continuously improve that way, that, like we try out the new technology around campus. But that's not exactly speaking for the Harvard Library here, but that's from my perspective.
Also in the library innovation, in the library lab, there's been a couple proposals that have come through that try to take advantage of current library resources and map them onto using tablets or using mobile devices. There's a study, one of the studies right now wants to find out how students actually use the devices when doing research and doing studying, and where they use them specifically. There's another project that uses an API to try to get all the paged objects from PDS, which is one of the library's page servers. And then there's another one that is for open scholarly articles. Which, Yana?
Oh, it's for open access journals on mobile devices.
Open access journals on mobile devices. And so there's a lot of interest that you see for these, for using these mobile devices within the libraries.
I'm Bob Darnton, the university librarian and a great admirer of the Berkman Center. What we've seen, I think, is a series of fascinating presentations about innovation and how it happens and how you make it happen. There's another aspect of the Berkman Center that may not have come through so strongly that I'd like to ask Sebastian about, or anyone else from the Berkman Center, and that is how you give us advice. I think there's a tremendous need throughout the universities in general, about advice when you're trying to develop something that's innovative. You don't quite understand how to get there. Often there's a lot of technology involved and you don't get that either. So we need a place to go to, if we're faced with a project, if we're faced with financial decisions, if we're a student or a faculty member trying to develop something but worried about impediments that are not just technological, but often legal. We need a copyright or intellectual property advisory service badly in this country because it's becoming more and more important. Maybe that's not a Berkman thing, but I wondered if you could present in some way some indication of how you can perform this advice service and how the word could get out to the university in general about it.
You want to go first?
Yeah. So Richard from the Cyber Law Clinic at Berkman, and we do often work with other projects at Harvard. So it sounds like some of what you're looking for in terms of particularly copyright advice, internet legal advice, is the kind of thing that we offer at the Cyber Law Clinic, and we do work with projects at Berkman and elsewhere at Harvard. So definitely, I would say that we are a resource that you can come to. You want to add to that, Delia?
Yeah, just to describe for people who don't know what the clinic is, we have students, law students who work with us and provide the legal services under our guidance and support. We're all licensed attorneys, and most of us have worked in the intellectual property and antitrust environment, and we have resources to provide, so by all means reach out. I will caveat that if you're doing something on behalf of the university, there's also the university's legal department that sometimes needs to get involved, and we can help navigate that as well.
I find that sometimes when lawyers are consulted about something, particularly in the early promising phase, they have kind of like it feels to the outsider like they've got a kind of Post-it note pad with just 2 checkboxes to apply to the idea. It's be afraid or be very afraid. So it's like, well, we don't think this will kill the endowment, but it might. Or this will kill the endowment. You can't too much threat. And it makes me wonder if we shouldn't have some means of some process by which a really interesting idea can basically put in a call for a legal and strategic hackathon that says instead of a couple people devoting weeks of time in a kind of deliberative, asynchronous, and very important process of writing up that memo that gives advice that I have caricatured as be afraid or be very afraid, is there some benefit to be had for mobbing an idea with a lot of good strategic thinkers over a very short time period to map out the kind of biggest problems there might be, the biggest opportunities, and often this can be hard to do in a comprehensive way. If you were to invert the idea, if you were to do this instead of that, if given your goals you were to totally, rethink how you were going to go about it, that might work a lot better. Those are the kinds of things that often come about when you've got a bunch of people around the table and a good collection of burritos that Rob provides, and able. I make pretty good burritos. I believe that. I've just advertised that to everyone. So it's almost like maybe there could be to put it in our parlance, a certiorari process where people could petition for cert from the hackathon table, and then we would, every quarter run an afternoon or a full day hackathon with a bunch of people, and it's one idea after another comes up, and we forge networks while we're at it, and we come to some legal understanding without committing it to paper and therefore committing the university. Back over to you guys.
This is actually a model that we've experienced, although sort of on an ad hoc basis, with particular projects that have come to us either through the university or sometimes from our friends over at MIT. And Andy and I will serve as consultants to these projects, work very closely with Kit and Dahlia and Chris Bavitz in the clinic to essentially mob these ideas and try to provide them this advice on a short-term basis. I'm sure, and Kit can talk about the work that the clinic has been doing with the Innovation Lab and and more about this, but it is a very powerful model. I mean, one of the things that we do through the Online Media Legal Network when we have a project come to us is hold an intake call where we essentially do wind up giving the clients who come to us sort of a first line vetting of their legal issues and try to help them orient, try to give them a sense of ways forward and things that they will eventually talk about with a lawyer that we assign them to. In the university context, we do try to help them within this structure, though. And I mean, I think what you're describing is a very powerful and a very important process.
And it sounds like a lot of fun having a hackathon, but I will push back on your image of us as people who are going to warn people off of doing cool things, because our goal is to figure out how you can do a cool thing.
Yeah, present company was excluded, of course.
But in general, I think it is helpful to projects that are going into uncharted territory to get guidance when they can from us. And the goal is always, how can we figure out what you're trying to do and figure out how you can do it effectively and ideally legally. So that's where we're coming from.
Yeah, and I imagine it would ultimately mean a rough taxonomy of problems that are very new to the person who's building her first database of legal threats and very common to those who see 10 such things. Those may not require the conclave model, and those things that are so new or unusual that they might really call upon having a diverse group of people in the room to think it through.
We love those. We love to keep those.
Not to get away from the legal perspective of it, but from the technical part of it also, I just wanted to say an inroad to the Berkman Center is obviously the library lab. So all the proposals that are going to the library lab are in some sense, technical or not, read by someone at the Berkman Center and looked at and involves in the Berkman Center. So one of the projects involved in the clinic, which is the library license thing they're working on specifically for copyright, came through the library lab. And a lot of these other programs come through the library lab. But that's also why we're having this meet and greet besides the library lab, is to try to find a venue or try to find an avenue. And you can think of it as someone you know knows someone at Berkman, and then you talk to them and they talk to someone at Berkman, and someone at Berkman then talks to you. But ideally, there's a much more efficient route than that. The library lab being one, and then venues like this, and getting to know someone so that you feel comfortable just asking them a question or understanding better. Sorry.
Just piling atop that, I think the doors of Berkman Center are generally always open, and we have lots of events programming. We have lots of open, I'm not on. So just saying, I think often people can just show up. We try to have open doors. We have a lot of open events. And so those opportunities tend to feed into collaborations really organically and well. And we try to make that happen. And I think a lot of our emails are online. A lot of our projects and resources are online as well. So I think drawing attention to those and the opportunities to get involved and to plug in tend to result in work and efforts.
You can also get to there, just like the MLP has multiple faces, you can also get to there from www.berk and Harvard. We'll just go back there.
One more thing, a lot of the projects that come out at Harvard are so innovative and so thinking beyond the vein of what maybe a traditional institution might think about, because people have the freedom and the time and resources to think wildly and broadly. So a lot of the law is just not written, and it's a great opportunity to not only coordinate with the legal resources, but also, iLab, Innovation Lab, and the business school and other places that can provide resources to think creatively about how to launch a very good idea and how to make it something that would be realistic to put out broadly, and using the tools for user testing and things like that. I think that's a key element that sometimes gets lost when you get mired in legal issues. So.
Yeah, I'm Steve Chapman. I'm in the law library, and I really see tremendous potential for us to collaborate in the innovation and problem-solving arenas. I think this is great. And I've been pondering, Jonathan's statement about escrow and thinking, well, what would inhibit people from escrowing these kinds of things into the library? And just coming from the American Association of Law Librarians conference that's going on at the Hines right now, there's a distinction that a lot of folks in the cultural heritage community make between corporate controlled content and the commons. And I've gone to presentations from you and your colleagues at Berkman to promote an idea of commons. And I wonder if the commons is bigger than library. And if we really think about sharing where, in an information ecosystem, where do our functions and services overlap? Because with Harvard's reputation and with Harvard's commitment of the people in this room to building and sustaining a commons, maybe that might remove some of the barriers to these transfers of content. And maybe, you know, the idea of something going into a library versus non-library, that's an important distinction to make with respect to the commitment to preserve, which I completely understand. But then with respect to the Harvard Library's big transformational strategy towards open access and Berkman promoting the open exchange of knowledge, really maybe working on that division of things where we think about how do we make information in this ecosystem persist, but also in terms of threats to something being marginalized versus something being open and broadly accessible. I'm not really sure what that means. If you want something to be broadly accessible, I'm not sure in the range of options at Harvard what the best entity would be to transfer that. And if we can collaborate not only in the arena of problem solving, but also maybe in information management, we might be able to make services that are more concrete to people with respect to this zone of things being in the commons versus not being in the commons. And maybe sometimes that's on a library server and maybe sometimes not. But it's hard for me to explain and it's hard for me to really view that ecosystem of services and content management that we have here, and for me to recognize the distinction of when something is truly open and not. Sometimes I think I understand it, but I don't know if that's another future arena where we might work on things. It's not a concrete problem as more as it is an aspirational mission to create and define a commons and to stake out our territory there as an institution.
And I think one is one's an administrative distinction, library, not library. The other is an ethos distinction, library, not library. And the ethos distinction, to me, is the most important one to understand. And there, I'd err on the side of library, whether or not it's administratively or financially even parked there. And I could even see commons can get a little complicated because maybe, again, in the realm of some collections and such, there's something that's contributed at day one but isn't to be revealed to the world until year 20. And with new encryption technologies, there are ways to kind of make that so. And even if the feds show up, you're like, hey, I don't have the key either until 20 years from now. In fact, there was just that controversy around documents about the IRA, right? Wasn't there somebody who did interviews? And again, you can say library, not library. My guess is the library was at a safe blast distance away from the whole thing because these were just researchers, but their ethos was library. They were trying to preserve something for the ages and in the service of that make a promise that in the short term it wouldn't be revealed to anybody, a promise that the local district attorney is, you had no business, mate, what are you doing? Like, you can't promise that. With the right encryption, you could. You could actually say, hey, they weren't going to give it to me unless I agreed to throw away the key for a while, and so there it is, Have at it, guys, but good luck. So I wonder if there aren't ways in which we could do that and maybe even routinize it. I don't know how many people for your own Gmail account would be willing, if suddenly a box were available to be checked that said, after your demise, another 50 years after that, all the contents of your account will be made available to the library system for indexing and categorization and processing and such. And if you're not lucky enough to end up with your own presidential library, this would be your own legacy. I think a number of people would have the ego or willingness to see some legacy made available, maybe even for their kids and descendants, those who would do genealogical research later, to check that box yes. And imagine the record that would be available 50 or 100 years from now if that box exists, than if it doesn't, where right now, Gmail keeps everything until it doesn't. I mean,
what about really Twitter? I mean, people are already implicitly buying into that because of the agreement with the Library of Congress. You don't even explicitly have to opt in right now, right? Just by participating in that.
I think the private correspondence is more interesting to me. But
yeah, right.
Yeah, save it all. That's what I say.
It's 2 o'clock, so we're going to be ending soon.
Hi, I'm John Murley from the Berkman Center, as probably 2/3 of the people in here are. I know part of this question. I know the answer to part of this question. but I'm not actually sure who to direct it to. Maybe Professor Darnton. But in seeing all these different initiatives, there's clearly a lot of overlap. There's a lot of things being developed in parallel, which in some ways is great. It's great to approach a similar problem from different angles, see what results, and so on. But I'm wondering what sort of coordination is actually taking place at the higher levels. We deal closely with the library lab and the library innovation lab. And recently, I realized that there's also the iLab, which I thought was the innovation lab, which is at HBS, not HLS. And every place seems to have a lab of some sort. I've got a people. Yes. Except for Ms. God. Way to take the air out of the question. So that's basically it. What is the overall structure of what's the coordination taking place?
I don't have an adequate reply, but it's true there are labs proliferating everywhere. I mean, we have 2 library labs. There's one, Sue's here, still here, and this is run out of the Office for Scholarly Communication of the library, and then there's the one we've been hearing about today, which is connected with the law school. The word innovation is all over the place. There are lots of projects and centers and institutes. I mean, this is the most confusing landscape here at Harvard imaginable. And your question is well put, because how can we find our way through it, and how can we avoid duplication? How can we make it more effective? One of the issues, I think, at least in the library lab number 2, is scaling up. So it tries to promote innovative projects. Often they come from, as we say, the grassroots up. Someone has a bright idea, we finance it and try it out, and it works. Sometimes, not always, but occasionally, it can be applied all over the university and all over other universities and non-universities. So I think a major aspect of our mission is upscaling, and we're just beginning to do it. We haven't worked out the best way to make this happen, but that's one issue. And we might think, I mean, the Berkman Center actually is not just in the law school anymore. It is university-wide. But I think parts of the university don't understand that and associate it with the law school. So I could imagine the sort of Berkman Center expanding and having a more pan-university presence, because it's such a wonderful place to get things done. And as I said, to go to when you need advice. We need advice all the time. And I think we could do the same. Maybe we should have one library lab or something like that. But you put your finger on a very important point.
Just quickly, in a very small ecosystem that is the technological, I guess all the technological developers at Harvard University, one of my developers, Dan Calspier, who's not here, noticed at the IT summit that it was very difficult to actually find out who was working on what. And when he was there, he was at a talk and he approached the speaker and said, "I'm doing exactly what you're doing. How can I find out about this?" And we found that there was very little area to post, very lightweight, to say this is what I'm working on. And so Dan actually wrote a quick prototype, and we approached the university CIO's office and said, "Would you be willing to use this?" And they said, "Absolutely, this is something that would be absolutely great to use." And so if that can be done in a very small, like a very niche community, I suppose, the tool could be expanded easily to use in other things, so people could register their projects and have like a clearinghouse of who's working on what and how to get interested in other research and how to get interested in other projects at the university. Not necessarily just like Berkman as well as, but the entire university, I think. And look forward for that piece of software to be up soon.
All right, well, I think we have to end now, but thank you all for participating. Thanks to the speakers. I think one thing we learned is we have a lot more conversations to have, and maybe there's some starting points now, and we can place names and faces. So thank you all for coming.